Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis of the Praise of Fly podcast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe and hit the notification bell. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Telegram. You can support me on Subscribestar, Buy Me a Coffee, and Locals, and also make sure to check out Substack. Today's episode 29 of the Grindset stream, episode 29 of Escaping the Moldbug Matrix. I'm again joined by Logos. Now, we finished the year 2007 and you are, and so we're going to do 3 separate videos summarizing the big 3 ideas that we found in 2007. And that way, that can be a summary for all the, almost 60 hours we've done now, Logos? It's crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy, right? When we first started this, we're like, yeah, let's just do like a 1-hour summary video of 2007. And then I thought about it. I'm like, wait, we have almost like 60 hours or more of content from 2007. Trying to do a 1-hour summary of that is 1/12. It's insane. It's a tiny, no, 1/60, not 1/12. That's a tenth of a sixth. That's insanely small. There's no way. So I'm like, okay, if we want to do like a 10% summary, you need 6 hours worth of stuff. And I'm like, well, a 6-hour summary is probably still not going to be watched by the people who'd want to watch a summary. So it's like, okay, we have to settle for a 5% summary. And so it's like, okay, here's 3 hours. What can we do in 3 hours? Here's 3 big points that he hits in his first year. And so, today and yesterday I was typing up this outline of like stuff we can talk about for an hour in like the first third of his content, the first what I call his arc. And his arc goes from basically his definition of formalism up through his definition of the iron polygon, where he's going to talk about castes, chimps, his problems with democracy. It's just basically setting the stage up for like, who are the players? What is the big looming problem he's trying to solve? The second arc is your favorite arc, Todd. It's the one where he blames everything that ever happened on Calvinism. And basically it starts right after the iron polygon and it ends with his big Dante article that was like your favorite of all of them. And then the last one is basically like an assortment hodgepodge of stuff, news articles. But the big stuff in the last third is where he starts making a positive case for neo-cameralism. And that's where he switches from formalism to neo-cameralism is like the really big thing he's trying to stand. So that's the rough arc.
All right. So we will start with the notes you have. We have up here on share screen. 4/23/2007, a Formalist Manifesto. So do you want me to read these or do you want to read them yourself, Logos?
You can read them, and if something jumps out at you, we'll just discuss them.
The problem with moderation is the center is not fixed. Libertarianism is great, but impractical. Formalism is meant to be a path from here to a libertarian society. Formalism is borrowed from legal formalism. Formalism is a starting point to build your own DIY ideology. The basic idea of formalism is just that the main problem in human societies is violence. The key is to look at the above as an engineering problem rather than a moral one. A necessary condition for preventing violence is property rules. Violence is conflict plus uncertainty. One sensible way to make rules is that you're bound to them if only you agree to them. The relevant agreements are those between you and people who own the streets, cities, etc. Own things like streets create ambiguous, complex relationships open to violence. Cities should have owners, but who decides? Formalism wants to figure out who owns what now and codify the ownership. Let's not get into who should have what. That would be a recipe for violence. The U.S. is just a corporation. The U.S. has no clear idea of what it's trying to do. Independent, privately owned city-states might be better. Democracy is ineffective and destructive. Democracy is mediocre and ineffective version of formalism. Yeah, I think for me, just like last time, the biggest problem we have here is this is like going to literally just be the bracket for everything wrong with Moldbug. Moldbug is a computer science engineer, and he's going to view everything as a computer science engineering problem, which is just utterly ridiculous for discussing politics in human societies.
It is. The things that I found really interesting, I did not notice that when we first read it the first time. He says formalism is meant to be a path from here to a libertarian society. Right there, that's a giant red flag for a lot of these right-wing reactionaries who are generally more authoritarian, integralists, people like that. If Moldbug's path is from here to libertarianism, why? What's the appeal? And that's one of the things that got us, going down this road all throughout Moldbug. We constantly like read crazy stuff in the article, and we're like, what is the appeal of this guy, of the people he seems to be appealing to, if what he really wants is some libertarian fantasy land? The next thing I found interesting was it's a starting point to build your own DIY ideology. multiple ideologies, as he admits here in the article and elsewhere, are recipes for violence, given the ambiguity of the shouldness of ideologies. So I think he's going to regret saying that people should use this as a springboard to build their ideologies.
Real quick, one thing I wanted to add, it was just that observation that made me argue that Moldbug was a Stirnerite and there was like an esoteric meaning to what he was saying.
Exactly. Yes.
That's if we want to assume there's some rational core to this. It's that he's actually trying to create chaos.
Yes. And I mean, all these are kind of interesting. I have a hard time picking my favorite ones, but like you noted the above is an engineering problem, not a moral one. That's indicative of Moldbug. I mean, it is, because when you say we ought to look at the problems in society as engineers, that strikes me as a very moral ought. Doesn't it strike you as a moral ought? What other ought would it be?
Yeah, I mean, especially in this context. I mean, well, one could say, if you're on an assembly line and, you need to have some sort of managerial change, you could say we ought to do this, but the ought intended is either for more efficiency in production or, better profits on the other side. But Moldbug isn't really writing to us to pitch to us a more efficient mode of production or higher profits.
Yeah, he could try to argue, well, it's a more efficient way to prevent violence. But it's like, yeah, if you just submit to who rules over you, I'm pretty sure that's an efficient way to avoid violence. Why didn't the Bolsheviks just think of that?
Well, this is attributed to Napoleon, but I think it was attributed to Napoleon. But the saying goes that the conqueror is always a man of peace. He would prefer that you peacefully submit to him.
Exactly. That's literally this. The next thing is, agreements. That this thing about agreements. One sensible way to make rules is that you're bound to them if and only if you agree. Especially when you look at the next things, it's like, well, what if I don't agree who ought to own a city? Right? Well, then I'm not bound by the rules of the city owner. Well, the city owner is going to want to kick me out. So he makes this idea that like polar bears wouldn't be allowed to live in human cities, not because there's something wrong morally with polar bears, but because they're just anathema to the functioning of cities. And it's like, well, okay, so if a bunch of people just don't agree that person X should own a city, violence ensues. Moldbug hasn't actually stopped anything.
Let's call that the polar bear problem.
Sure, yeah, Schrodinger's polar bear, right? And then the last part of it wasn't super interesting. The U.S. is a corporation; it has no clear idea of what it's trying to do. I mean, yeah, that seems kind of true to me. Independently, privately owned city-states might be better, maybe from the perspective of critiquing the government, but they could be very dystopian and worse. Think like Judge Dredd or something like that, which we come up on in later articles. That's worth noting. And then he whines about democracy, which we'll get to in the next article, so we don't have to dwell on that.
Yeah, I think that's enough for formalism right now. So we're 4/24/2007. The case against democracy, 10 red pills. The rule of law, not democracy, is responsible for peace and prosperity in US, Europe, Japan. Democracy is sand in the gears of freedom and law. At worst, excludes them, Iraq. Fascism and communism are best understood as a form of democracy. The state is just another giant corporation rather than something that serves citizens' interests. The state is just another giant corporation Power in the West is held by civil servants, not its people. The state consists of all entities affiliated with the state, such as NGOs. Rather than being a danger, right-wing politicians are basically control that position. Democracy is politics. The absence of politics is the absence of democracy. Western governments are clones of the quasi-democratic FDR regime, best compared to Putin or Mubarak. Civil service government degrades and cannot continue to exist without captured education and media, which the internet will route around. Oh, yeah, I remember that. yeah, I remember that. Well, I mean, again, I get the few high points here is he's intentionally conflating two concepts, which in the colloquial sense are called democracy. One is a democratic decision-making process where those who have a stake in the decision-making process vote on propositions. That's what we saw in ancient Athens, medieval Iceland, and Puritan New England. And then we have popular sovereignty, that the right to rule of any one person is because you have the support of the people. But you see, part of the problem is all political authority in some sense is popular sovereignty. Because in Etienne de la Boétie's Discourse on Voluntary Servitude, even the tyrant can't coerce everybody all the time to do what he wants. There's going to have to be some sense in which they submit to that, whatever other justification you give. It's just that now, rather than appealing to, I'm the son of a god like in ancient times, or I'm chosen by God like in medieval times, or I'm the mightiest warrior, it's popular sovereignty. But all of that's a series of complex political concepts that are just jumbled up together in this mishmash of nonsense. The other thing is politics is democracy. I mean, this is the stupidest thing I ever heard. So apparently, Logos medieval courts didn't have politics. I didn't know.
Yeah, right.
That's just the stupidest thing I've ever heard. There's no commentary needs to be given on this.
Yeah, I mean, quickly going through these, the rule of law, not democracy, is responsible. It's like, whose laws, and why do people agree on the laws? Why do people agree to follow the laws? Why don't people overthrow the kingdoms that make laws, right? The entire connection between democracy and the rule of law, ostensibly, maybe it doesn't work perfectly, is that people, because they have some say in the laws, have a vested interest. They have skin in the game in making sure those laws are upheld. Because if you break the law, you're breaking something I, wanted to happen, and I thought so did you, right? That's kind of like the agreement he was talking about how rules are manifested in the last article. Democracy is sand in the gears of freedom and law. It absolutely can be. I mean, democracy is only as good as its people, but I mean, any system can be sand in the gears of freedom and law. So can monarchy. So can corporatism. I mean, if there's a hostile takeover within your board, which we'll get to with the neo-cameralism articles later on, you can have the exact same outcomes. No system is immune to this. Fascism and communism are best understood as forms of democracy. Schrodinger's democracy, that meme is going to come up over and over and over again. So that bears repeating. The state is just another giant corporation. Yeah, okay. Power in the West is held by civil servants. True, that's actually kind of based. The state consists of all entities affiliated with the state, such as NGOs. Yep, I think that's something we can give Moldbug props for. That wasn't being talked about early and often enough. Rather than being a danger, right-wing politicians are basically controlled opposition. He said that a slightly different way, but that's roughly the meaning, and I think it's true currently. Yeah, I agree with your democracy is politics thing. That's goofy as heck. Western governments are clones of the quasi-democratic FDR regime, best compared to Putin or Mubarak. That's hilarious. I mean, say what you want about some of the authoritarian measures of FDR, but trying to stop corporations from gunning people down with, Gatling gun strapped buggies, I don't think can be compared to Putin or Mubarak. That's just absolutely insane. And this is one of the strands that I'm picking up with Moldbug. So for you, it's the engineering thing. For me, it's this whole apologia of some of the grotesque things that corporations used to do, and saying, one day for no reason at all, FDR came to power. It's basically that meme. Civil service government degrades and cannot continue to exist. Oh yeah, the internet will route around that. We both got a chuckle out of that. Okay, I'm good with that article.
Okay, 425, 2007. Why do atheists believe in religion? Everyone believes in religion, i.e. the distinction between religious and secular phenomena. Fallacy. The distinction between religion and other forms of delusion are important. What matters is actions, not motivations. Examples of throwing Jewish persons into volcanoes and partial birth abortions. If oppressive regimes were to be religious rather than secular, 20th century Russia or Germany, wouldn't we see our opposition as religious intolerance? If Marxism were a religion, Marxist economics would be pretty close to being intelligent design, says the Austrian. So what Moldbug was trying to do here was saying, okay, there's a category of beliefs we call irrational ideas, which we call religion. But there are other irrational beliefs that are not typically called religion, but are religion. I mean, this is just a whole tired new atheist framework, which I reject entirely. But using that, he says, well, what if Marxism were a religion? Yeah, well, what if libertarianism were a religion, Logos? How about that?
That's true. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, if you're going to make that claim, that immediately follows. And with, Russia and Germany. Okay, this is where Moldbug is interesting, right? The only people that at the time were saying that the Soviet Union was like this oppressive state atheist religion killing Christians were Christian apologists in a completely different category of the discourse that was going on at the time.
Yeah.
The fact that Moldbug is actually saying this as an atheist is actually kind of impressive.
No, it's definitely true. And we see more of this discourse being trickled through today. So if I was to give Moldbug props about some of the stuff he said in 2007, this would be a big one, because so much of the discourse around, say, public education and so on is, social justice is a religion being foisted on children. And so much of this rhetoric is now basically common political parlance where, back in his day, it was kind of, groundbreaking to say this. So I'll give him props for that. One
Yeah,
thing
just real quick, as again, the only people who, as an atheist, mind you, he's saying this too, right?
Yeah.
Christian fundamentalists were saying this, but nobody cared what they said.
Exactly. Yes. One thing I thought he was a missed opportunity in his article that I felt he could have pointed out was, I think one of the reasons why people care about religious conclusions versus other conclusions is, I think I said this when we did the video as well, and I'll repeat it for the summary, is there's if there were an empirically motivated reason why you would want to, like, I don't know, throw virgins into a volcano, you can kind of interact with the empirical science and say, well, listen, I think the science is wrong because X, Y, and Z or something. But if it's a religious motivation, some of the worry that atheists have are, you can't really interact with it in the much the same way. If a religious follower has a sincere belief that God is telling them to do something, then that's it. There's actually a very popular sticker back in the 2000s I saw. It's, God said it, I believe it, that settles it. It was like a 3-sticker, like bumper sticker slogan type thing. And I think that's one of the things that Moldbug should have talked about if he was genuinely interested in why people categorize religion as this thing, instead of, if his concern wasn't rhetorical. But I think the bigger point in religion's favor in all this is he makes a lot of appeals to consequences in the article. Well, what matters is the consequences to actions. It's like, well, Todd, how are you supposed to evaluate the consequences to actions?
Good question. It's called ethics.
It's called ethics. It's called ethics, right? Now, how are you supposed to decide whether an action produces good or bad ones if we're all just unethical people and all we really care about is who is in charge? Generally speaking, religion, like it or not, was one of the original ways we would give ourselves nice, simple, ethical models for people to navigate a lot of very complicated solutions all at once. They're not like, some giant 2,000 tome treatise on ethics. The Bible is much smaller than that, say, but people get a lot out of it, and society functioned pretty well on it for the most part. So some of this perplexity from Moldbug has to do with the fact that he's trying to discard ethics and then wondering why religion is such an important distinction to people. Why can't we just care about the consequences? Well, how are we measuring them, Moldbug? So that's what I found interesting about that article.
Yeah. Okay, moving down. 4/28/2007 and the Kernel monitor meme. Why do we categorize beliefs according to whether they're based on supernatural entities rather than whether they're real world consequences?
Forget the whether, that was a type, but rather than their real world consequences.
Okay. Define religion in terms of kernels and monitors to remove paranormal reference. Kernel is a set of received beliefs gotten from somewhere else about the world. Kernel has 2 parts: true, false beliefs, and right, wrong actions. Logical versus ethical kernel. You get your kernel from your trusted institutions, friends, family, church, school, the media, and so on. Later change monitor to repeater, 429. Central question is how we separate repeater and state, 429. Okay, so again, this just highlights everything wrong with Moldbug. The entire world and universe we live in is not a computer code. It's just like, I don't know why anybody would think walking outside of their office when they're done with work, that looking out the window, you're going to see a whole world run by computer code. The only way Moldbug could make sense is if he thought that.
Yeah, I see what he was trying to do on the second read of the article. He's trying to take the separation of church and state, and he's trying to abstract it in a way that will make it more robust to certain types of what he sees as quasi-religious infiltration, like social justice creeping in. I mean, I'll give the guy props for noticing the threat of social justice in 2007, which most people wouldn't have noticed until 2012, maybe 2014. And so what he's trying to desperately to do is come up with a way to say, look, here's how this crazy thing infecting academia is like a religion, and you should care about it, even if it doesn't have like some Talmudic holy book or like it's like a Taliban or something like that.
I got it, Logos. I got it. He's basically James Lindsay. He's like, hey, Mr. Based atheist, who doesn't believe in mysticism. There's just like evil mysticism growing in the academy. You want to help me stop it?
Right, except he's also trying to the difference between him and James Lindsay is Moldbug even in 2007 knew how far the problem spread. James Lindsay thinks that a few ESG cartels and some woke people in schools and whatnot are in a Gnostic cult that you can kind of put a stop to. And what Moldbug is saying is like, no, the New York Times, NGOs, these things he's going to call the Iron Polygon are all conspiring with educations and other institutions to push the same narrative, and we have to analyze it all from the same angle. So what is the thing he has in common? And he's a programmer, so he's like, okay, well, in my line of work, here's how we can best summarize what all of these different entities have in common. Let's see what we can do with that. Is it cringy? Yeah. Is it kind of justifiable in hindsight? Maybe.
So, yeah, 5/1/2007. What if logos didn't exist?
Oh, that stings.
Yarvin thinks of himself as lawful neutral. The practical definition of evil is that evil is the same thing as chaos. Evil and good are results, not volitions. Human actions have been shrouded in a thing called ethics, which no one can define. Social justice is the same thing as chaotic good. Whoa, those are shots fired, Logos, right there.
I know. Typing up that last one reminded me why I was so mad at that article the whole time.
Well, first of all, I love it how we can't define ethics, but we also can't seem to define formalism or anything else. So, what is even that supposed to mean? But again, like we said earlier in dealing with one of the earlier essays, he says that the human. Let's see. Yeah, evil and good are results, not volitions. But again, how do you measure the results? That's a thing called ethics, but he wants to get rid of ethics. So then there's no way to measure that.
Right.
So, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, going through this point by point, like, he thinks of himself as lawful neutral, which I find hilarious because, as you saw in the first article in the bullet points, he was lambasting moderates because the center never holds. Well, if the center never holds, then what does it actually mean to be lawful neutral? And it just sounds to me like a lawful moderate.
Yeah.
The practical definition of evil is that evil is the same thing as chaos. It's like, well, I don't know about that. I mean, he does kind of preempt my response in the article where he says like, well, okay, some people say that like the Stalinists and other people were like like mobsters have a very organized, non-chaotic way of inflicting suffering on a whole bunch of people. But the response he gave to that just wasn't very good. And so there's no need to put an extra bullet point for the response because he kind of hand waved it away. He didn't actually deal with the issue. Evil and good are results, not volitions, but how do you measure the results if, as you then say, we can't define ethics, right? What is the ethical thing that makes some results better or worse than other ones? That doesn't even make any sense. But if you have an ethical model for measuring results, you certainly have an ethical model for measuring actions in some sense, predicting actions by the results, predicting actions as virtuous or non-virtuous or whatever, and suddenly you rebuild all of ethics. Good job. Social justice is the same thing as chaotic good. I'll say what I said again the first time I saw the article. Social justice is most definitely lawful good, not chaotic good. It thinks that you can make a bunch of laws to get society to be nice. The entire point of social justice, which I think Moldbug would appreciate, is if you look at our legal code, there are a lot of loopholes for people to be discriminated against. I said this before too. Their things are like, well, people get discriminated against on job hiring because they have ethnic sounding names, right? That's not something the legal code has a way to really deal with at the moment because people who are looking at jobs don't know the race of the applicant necessarily, especially if the applicant doesn't put on there, but they might look at the name to have what they call internal bias. And so the entire point of social justice is to take these implicit evils that human beings have and make a whole bunch of laws to force society to be good around those implicit laws or those implicit prejudices. Eradicate them through the use of laws is basically the entire goal of social justice. Well, so to call that chaotic good is stupid.
But that's also what Moldbug wants to do because
I know that's why I said he should appreciate it.
there's all these like imperceptible judgments that people are making all the time that don't necessarily fit into some sort of like orderly formula.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean we have to like autistically define who owns what at all times to make sure all property rights are being respected to their holders to avoid violence. Like Moldbug and the social justice people have a whole lot in common. They care about implicit bias.
Mhm.
He cares about implicit disagreements over property ownership. But they're basically two sides of a similar coin.
Well, but that could be itself a result of implicit bias.
That's true. Moldbug, social justice advocate all along.
5/5/2007. Two kinds of repeaters. Kernel updates should be protected. Separation of church and state only protects against some repeaters, but not others. Kernel's updated to include metaphysical statements on top of logical, ethical. By definition, metaphysics does not affect reality but can motivate beliefs, so we monitor them. Disinterested repeaters have no organization motivation but to repeat anything other than what their client wants. Concerned repeaters have external forces which motivate them to propagate certain assumptions and deter them from others. Okay, so this first line here again is the nascent social justice woke. We need to have another category for irrational beliefs that aren't really quote religion.
Right.
Okay, yeah, he was ahead of the curve on that one. Kernel's update to include metaphysical statements. Not much to say here. This is just really stupid. By definition, it does not affect reality.
Yeah, by whose definition? He never actually defined
mhm.
that I saw like metaphysics in a robust sense that would get him to conclude this by definition.
I'm still wondering why so many Thomists like this guy. My gosh.
Yeah, this is the second part where we're doing our analysis and our first read through, and we got to this. And we're just like, dude, so many Catholics like this guy,
Yeah,
and
no
like,
sense.
how could you be an integralist and a
Yeah.
Moldbugian if you think there's like a telos? Like the point of metaphysics is there's a telos, there's a natural law that transcends just what we see from day to day in causes and effects
Mhm.
that kind of determines how things ought to be. And so when you're in alignment with the telos, things go great. When you're not, things go badly. So metaphysics does absolutely reflect reality on this view. Yeah, this is one of the things that just prompted our investigation of why do these people like Moldbug.
Well, and not only that, not that it's really relevant to today's show, but he does attack Protestants a lot. He also attacks Catholics a lot too.
He does. I think we'll get to that in a little bit in the second arc, the next week.
Disinterested repeaters have no organizational motivation but to repeat anything other than what the client wants. So I'm guessing this is what he views as the groups at risk of being infected by the woke.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, because if the client is taken over by the woke, they'll just do what they're told in the end because they have no other motivation.
No, actually, sorry. Disinterested are the ones that are not at risk of being infected by the woke. So this is just like the business client relationship where clients come to a business for a service, and the service has no other motivation but to do what the client asks them to do directly and leave it at that. It's a concerned people. So think about education in the US. You'd think that it's very transactional. Parents send their kids to school. They expect their kids to learn reading, writing, arithmetic, be good citizens, know a little bit about history, whatever. But then you got these external things that impose on schools. How do the schools get grants? They have to have the curriculum be a certain way. How do the schools get brand new computers? Well, a grant from the Bill Gates Foundation would help, but they have to add X, Y, or Z to the curriculum, right? And so on and so on and so forth. So when you have these outside influencers influencing what schools teach children, then the transactional relationship between parents and the schools via the school board and PTA gets circumvented by these outside parties that will put the day-to-day operations of the school at risk if the school doesn't do X, Y, or Z that the parents may or may not approve of.
Yeah.
To James Lindsay's credit, James Lindsay is railing against private schools for this very reason. This is the thing he's really, really worried about, is that unless you can shut down the ESG cartels, the grant system which funds schools and all these things, parents running to private schools to vouchers and all that stuff to deal with what's going on in these schools isn't going to work, because James Lindsay isn't using this word that Moldbug used. But private schools would be concerned repeaters every bit as much as public schools if a big chunk of their funding, investment, and so on hinges on them doing stuff their clientele doesn't want them to do. And so there'll still be the same conflict of interest.
Exactly. And then, well, you just mentioned concerned repeaters, so I'll just let you give your commentary on this if there's anything else you want to
add. No, I think it's pretty good. I think we got to give them props. I think this entire private school debate that we're having now in 2023 with James Lindsay versus Rufo and other people, that was basically, no, I don't think it's Rufo, was it? Anyway, Moldbug preempted this debate 16 years ago. I think some credit is due for that.
Yeah. Castes of the United States, or sorry, 5/6, 2007. Brahmins are young academics that work for NGOs and the like. Dalits are people who seek power, wealth, sexual access. Favorite occupation of Dalit men is crime, women, crime, welfare, and other system games. Helots are imported immigrant peasants. Optimists are traditional chamber of commerce class. Is unstable since children often become Brahmins. Vaisya are subtle the earth trade workers whose social status is community, motherhood, etc. The only thing I remember here was he collapsed the proletariat and lumpen proletariat into Dalits, and I thought that was kind of dodgy. I didn't really buy that because or was it the Helots he did that? I forget. But remember that he confused like the proletariat and the lumpen proles in the same group.
Yeah, remind me what the lumpen proles were again.
Those are people that are from a Marxist perspective, are not. They're anti-revolutionary. So in the current modern day left debate, like, you know, are sex workers or like baristas, like Starbucks proletariat? They're not. They're lumpen proles, or they're service workers, right? So if it's criminal or dirty activity, it could be racketeering, could be gangsterism, could be smuggling. You know, all of that stuff would be what we call lumpen proletariat.
Gotcha. Yeah. So the best Moldbug could do with that is just say that these people are like Dalits with high Brahmin influences or something like that, would basically be like his version of a lumpen prole.
The other thing too is, man, the way America's gone in the last 16 years, a lot of these categorizations just don't seem to be meaningful anymore.
He kind of notes that in a future blog. So, for example, one of the things he says, what do you think about this, is that optimates basically dissolved and got absorbed into the Vaisyas.
Let's see. That's possible. You also have here in your notes, many of their children become Brahmins.
Yes. So
yeah, the optimates definitely dissolved. They disappeared.
Yes.
And let's see.
Yeah, one thing that's interesting that I think is noteworthy is that
what is the profession of Dalits? Are these like people that do like finance?
Dalits?
Yeah.
No. So basically, the I had to read this paragraph over and over and over again to really get a feel for it. I think what he's trying to help us visualize with that, these are the street people who are trying to they make a living, or their social status is based entirely on, quote, street cred. So promiscuity, stuff like that. They'll work doing even dingy jobs if they have to, but they'll be G's if they have to. They'll mooch off welfare if they have to. And he didn't fully ethnicize them as racial, because he noted that, like, so white people can be Dalits as well, the Appalachian types that live in trailer parks, very, very good at playing the system, getting welfare, stuff like that. And so, yeah, they're people that don't see jobs as a means to status in and of themselves, but they see bling, promiscuity, things like that as the ends, and jobs are just things you have to kind of do to get money, you know.
Got it. All right. That's all I got on that. Anything you have?
Nope, I didn't have any commentary on there. I think it's useful because he'll reference these in a lot of future articles, so it's nice for me to have notes to refer to now in the future when he's like, oh yeah, the O's and the V's are doing blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, who are the O's and the V's again?
Yeah. Okay, 5/7/2007, the BDH-OV conflict. Democrats are the party of Brahmins, Dalits, Helots, BDH. Republicans are the party of Optimates and Vaisyas. Not all African Americans and Hispanics are BDH, some are V's. Keeping this conflict from boiling over into war has been a central concern of American intellectuals for the last 200 years. Democracy perpetuates the conflict. BDH propagates so much hate for OVs that Yarvin instinctively sides with the OVs. OVs have no intellectual institutions worth anything. OVs are collapsing into Vs. Political strategy of OV is awful, and if they took power, Yarvin isn't sure he'd want to continue live in the U.S. 20th century Russia treated better than Germany because Brahmins won, and winners write the history books. Conflict stretches back to the 60s when V's figured out the New Deal wasn't about them at all. It was a Brahmin project. Brahmins are modern Roundheads. OVs are modern Cavaliers. Okay, so I'm not happy with the whole 5 divisions, but I'm not here to litigate that at the moment. This is the really stupid part. Democracy perpetuates the conflict. No, it's capitalism. Who brings in all the Helots, Logos? Pull the room. Who brings in the Helots?
Good point.
I mean, it's just so stupid. I mean, even in 2007, when we had discussions about the border, it was, and then the undocumented immigrants with the left. It's this pressure to have cheap labor that keeps pulling these people in, which has nothing to do with the democratic institutions. That's just patently absurd.
Right.
Let's see. And then the other thing that was patently absurd was, right, he says the V's figured out the New Deal wasn't about them. Vices are the working class people. The New Deal wasn't totally for those people. What is he talking about?
Okay. So for that point, what he was talking about is that the way the New Deal was supposed to be is that if you're working hard, if you're trying to climb the income ladder, right, you're supposed to have some initial guarantees, wages, things corporations can't do to you, whatever. So the language to present this stuff was all Vicia in mind. Think of the Salty the Earth factory workers who wanted to go home, make a good living, go to church on Sunday, those type of people. But what the New Deal turned into very, very quickly ended up being a Brahmin project where you get like the Great Society, you get the welfare state, right? That's the biggest thing he notes is the New Deal became less about buffering workers to make sure they got dignity, deserved pay, whatever for the work they were doing, and it quickly morphed into this intellectual project to make a perfect society by using welfare, grant systems to public education, and so on.
Okay. The other thing is using his own classification of these classes and the basic history. The third piece of BS is this: the OVs. Okay, the Brahmins are the Cavaliers. Because remember, let's think about this. In the English Civil War, the New Model Army and Parliament, most of these were, and specifically the Puritans who led that after the organization of the New Model Army, were the tradesmen. These were the ones that ran the printing presses, that did all the craftsmanship. The people that just lived off these large bloated pensions, the Brahmins, were the royalists. Like, this is just idiotically stupid on every level.
I don't know too much about the Civil War. I figured you'd have something to say about that.
Like, even by his own classification schema, the Brahmins are the Cavaliers.
Really?
And
I thought the Cavaliers were like...
those are the royalists.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So the Roundheads were Cromwell's men, and they would have been recruited from the Puritan stock who were tradesmen. And who were the tradesmen? The Viceas.
Oh, I thought the Cavaliers were supposed to be Cromwell's guys. I didn't know the Roundheads were... Yeah, that's stupid. That's really stupid.
Yeah, because the tradesmen of England became the backbone of... In fact, that's why the royalists couldn't imagine they'd lose to Cromwell, because they thought, well, how can these... dumb yokel tradesmen, who run printing presses and make chairs and such, beat us on the battlefield.
Exactly.
It's just stupid. See, you could either make this argument from one of two ways: a sort of like religious, philosophical evolution, which that's next week, so I'm not going to bring that up now, or class interest.
Right.
No, which group today is closest to the class interests of the Cavaliers, and which group today is closest to the class interests of the Roundheads? Well, the Vices would be the Roundheads, and the Brahmins would be the Cavaliers. It's just stupid.
Yeah, I mean, now that I know that the Royalists were the Cavaliers and not Cromwell's Dragoons, like, it's absolutely obvious.
Yeah.
Some other things that I thought was interesting that, progressed in 23 years is the Cubans in Florida, for example, are a very, very reliable right-wing voting demographic, both in the midterms and the 2020 election. Those are helots by Cromwell's own standard. And so I wonder how Yarvin is going to be explaining that one in his future blogs. I bet you he has. I just haven't read them, the Grey Mirror. let's see, anything else? Yeah. Democracy perpetuates the conflict. He made that argument about that. The idea is, without democracy, this would have just erupted into a civil war, and we would have been like a Haiti and just got this over with or whatever. And so Cromwell's idea, not Cromwell's, Yarvin's idea is that democracy is kind of like a reenactment of a civil war every 2 to 4 years, where we kind of like, bring all of our troops, strong arm the government in doing this or that thing. Instead of like having a decisive conflict, we just say, okay, pack it up, guys, do it again in 2 more years or whatever. And that's the way in which he thinks that democracy kind of like perpetuates the conflict.
But you see, that's still corporations because they don't want all their workers to kill each other.
Well, that's true. Exactly right. Stability is good for business. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I thought your point about this whole thing being perpetuated by capitalism was dead on. Because of course, what happened during COVID. Trump's like, dude, I'm going to use this as an excuse to close the border. This is going to be great. No more H-1B visas. And then Apple rings up his son-in-law, I think Kushner, and Kushner's like, all right, I gotta talk to Daddy Trump about this. For the next day, Trump reopens the border. It's like, yeah, this is very obviously something perpetuated by corporations, and
Yes.
Yarvin just doesn't want to admit it.
He doesn't want to admit it.
No.
Well, because remember, he wants the hobbits to go to sleep to let the Dark Elves win so that the Brahmins can stay in power.
Oh, that's the other thing. Scroll up. There's a point I gotta talk to you about this. This is huge. It wasn't this one. It was, wait.
Keep going.
Not the Caste, down. It was the conflict one. Political strategy of the OVs is awful, and if they took power, Yarvin isn't sure he'd want to continue to live in the U.S.
Yeah.
He says that explicitly. So he's simultaneously a quote-unquote quasi-dark elf that's trying to look out for the interests of the hobbits. But if the hobbits actually got what they wanted, Yarvin actually wouldn't want to live in the United States.
Yeah.
What are we supposed to take from that?
What are we supposed to take from that?
I was floored when I read that, right? He's trying to be like, oh, this whole overturning Roe v. Wade, it's like a tactical blunder, blah, 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 blah. Really, he's just horrified that it happened.
Yeah. Well, and let's look at this objectively from like an economic angle. The reason why Roe v. Wade was so difficult to overturn was this has significant implications for women in the workforce,
right?
Which would drastically raise the cost of labor if they weren't able to participate.
Yeah. And of course, the left makes a similar beer argument. They say, well, people who just the capitalists just want to make abortion inaccessible so that we can have a bunch of babies flooding the labor force with lots of,
That's such a stupid argument because they want to have the market depressed.
Yeah.
So if the women go home to get pregnant, you take that thumb off the scale and labor goes up.
Exactly.
That's an idiotic argument.
It's just funny to me that everybody's trying to make it. I don't think the left can make it credibly, given immigration, all the other stuff that they want.
No. Well, not only that, given that corporations now, after the Dobbs decision, are now just offering abortions.
Exactly. Yeah.
Give me a break. Like, I mean, what?
They'll fly female employees to other states to have abortions done. That cannot be cheap. So they have to know that what they get from doing that is worth far more.
Right. Which is why the entire left-wing rhetoric about women in the workforce is complete nonsense.
Yep.
5/10/2007. Roth, Castes, chimps, and Ragnardung. Chimps practice linear ranking, and in a stable chimp society, every chimp knows their rank. This can be thought of like a simian version of formalism. The last 200 years have been a chimp-like battle for dominance. Affection from higher, Brahmin to lower, comes across as care or concern for low-down DH. To B comes across as loyalty or respect. Genocides often fueled by resentment, often Vaisya resentment. Brahmins put energy into cultivating Dalit resentment. Yarvin doesn't want to crush the Brahmins, merely to remind them that they are the ruling caste. Trying to engage vices is counterproductive. Have them vote once and move on with life. Well, it's interesting here, given what we just said before, that he wouldn't want to live in a world run by Vaisyas. He says that genocides are fueled by Vaisya resentment.
Yep.
Huh. Well, what you afraid of, Moldbug?
Oh, you calm down. You calm down.
Let's see. No, Okay, he is correct that the Brahmins position themselves with regards to the Dalits and Helots as, oh, we care about you, we have concern for you. That's true. That's how they maintain their control over the constituency.
Right.
But what do you think about this? Maybe one of the reasons why the Brahmins flipped out on Trump is that his appeal to the average American might have risked them losing control of the Helots.
Yeah, I think to some degree they did lose some control of the Helots because of what Trump did. Yeah.
I mean, if we're just going to use Moldbug's framework here, maybe that explains something. But
Yep.
Yeah, this is all the stuff that we saw with Dark Elves. This is all the stuff that we saw with Orrin McIntyre. And the only thing I have to say about this article here is, why was anybody surprised when he went on Orrin McIntyre?
Yeah, well, there's some more good stuff to say about the article too. I mean, the first 2 bullet points is where we get Schrodinger's chimp. So let's review for the audience why this is interesting. Yes, when the pecking order is known by all the chimps, then the chimps live in a quasi-formalist simian version society. What's the problem? As Moldbug noted in this paper, sometimes chimps get old and young chimps get strong. Well, in that case, the hierarchy has to change. And so something is going to be a young chimp and something is going to be an old chimp. So hierarchies don't last forever. Corporate hierarchies don't last forever. Hierarchies within corporations don't last forever. Types of governments don't last forever. And you have to find a way to test the waters to see who's a young chimp and who's an old chimp when conflict happens. So Moldbug can rail against democracy, but if Moldbug wants to avoid violence, I fail to see a better way to have a young chimp versus old chimp test to see if people believe the ideas being contested. All the other things we've tried so far have ended up in war. Like Moldbug's solution just seems to be, we'll just have everybody run everything like a perpetual corporation and have the corporate police just maintain constant order or something. It's like, well, that's how you get a Bolshevik revolution, dude. Like, that's just not going to work.
No. Well, no, Logos. The Bolshevik Revolution won't happen because we have biometric locked guns. Duh.
Well, exactly. Yeah. and so this is why, as we'll look at future articles and future stuff that's already been done, I mentioned glibly Schrodinger's chimp. This idea that whenever Moldbug talks about formalism is this ideal way to maintain peace through transitions of power and so on and so forth. This is predicated on everybody knowing who the young chimp and the old chimps are, so order can be kind of maintained. But as soon as that becomes ambiguous, as soon as revolution is in the air, so to speak, formalism doesn't have an answer. Formalism rests on the assumption that nobody cares about the odds, about who rules. But as soon as you've crossed that bridge, as soon as you're in revolutionary territory, formalism's up a creek without a paddle. The only thing you can do is young chimp versus old chimp, and so you can do that democratically, or you can do that with violence, which formalism wants to avoid. This was a second big clue in for us, Todd, I think, that Moldbug was a Stirnerite. Because once you've stripped democracy, knowing full well this young chimp, old chimp dynamic, what you're left with is basically a might makes right Stirnerite paradise.
Yep.
So that was the first one. Let's see. The affection part was good. The animosity one. Contempt. Yep, that's kind of true. Genocides, okay. Brahmins put energy into cultivating Dalit resentment. That's true. Yeah, notice that they haven't put a lot of energy into cultivating Helot resentment. Now, on further analysis, what I find interesting about that is what Moldbug didn't say. Why didn't Moldbug say that Brahmins put energy into cultivating Helot resentment? Well,
yeah.
Because he knows that the O's are working with the Brahmins to bring the Helots in. And so if the Brahmins were to cultivate Helot resentment as explicitly as they cultivate Dalit resentment, that spigot would get shut off very quickly.
Right, yeah. Well, and really also too, the in most cases, again, you mentioned the Appalachian area, which is an exception. Dalits are just, Helots who've been here a while.
That's true. Yeah.
Right. They're just Helots that have been here a while. And because the system doesn't really work for them, they resort to violent criminal behavior.
Or finding ways to play the system to make it work for them. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, 5/11/2007, the anti-singularity. Weak anti-singularity hypothesis is that the moral state of society is independent from the state of its technology. Strong anti-singularity hypothesis is that the moral society is inversely correlated with the state of its technology. Well, B is totally false. It's absolutely connected to the state of technology.
No. Correlation means it's connected. Inverse means the better technology gets, the worse the moral state of society gets.
No, weak anti-singularity, I'm saying.
Oh, I thought you said B was false. Yeah, the weak one is false.
Yeah, I meant
Yeah,
to
for
say
sure.
A. Yeah, weak is false. That's wrong. Totally wrong.
Absolutely. Yes.
Strong is true. Absolutely true.
Absolutely. Yep.
I misspoke. I don't have anything to say other than that.
No, this is just kind of like a bonus article. This is the 11th one. Nice, quick, based Moldbug. Strong anti-singularity is the way to go.
Yeah, that's definitely the way to go. This is also kind of relevant to the discussion I had with Charles Haywood a few months ago.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, last one for today, guys. 5/12/2007, the Iron Polygon, power in the United States. As a formalist, Yarvin defines power as the ability to change the rules or clarify them where no rules exist. No one who has power post-New Deal wants anyone to think of them as having power. Iron Triangle, lobbyists, Congress, civil servants, a good start, but incomplete. To be a vertex in the polygon, one must have responsibility and to be protected from public opinion. Major vertices are press, education, judiciary, Fed banks, the Hill, civil service, NGOs, military contractors, IP holders. Yeah, I mean, certainly in 2007, there was this whole, well, actually going back to like the 80s, like Reagan and then Clinton and then now, George W. Bush. We're just like you. Or that was a huge, campaigning point. Oh, we're just like you Americans. They like go to bars and drink with people. Like, yeah, the president's just like me. So yeah, they did want to hide their power level, at least back then. And then yeah, lobbyists, Congress, civil servants. Yeah, there's definitely more to that group, but let's see. One must have responsibility and to be protected from public opinion. What do you mean by that? Like you're protected from the consequences of public opinion?
Yeah. So like the public can't go raise a bunch of torches and pitchforks outside their politician's office and get people from the Fed fired because the Fed is independent from the government. So they can like nominate people to be hired, I think, and there's like some weird nomination process, but it's technically an independent institution in that the government can't directly like fire the people there. So it doesn't matter how upset the people get, you're done. Supreme Court's another example where they have a lot of responsibility and they write constitutional law, but or at least interpretations that make our constitutional law. But you can't have politicians remove people from the Supreme Court, despite how much people really hate them. All politicians can do is nominate new lifelong appointees. The other example would be like the New York Times, where the New York Times writes a bunch of bad stories. People might get really mad about it, but the New York Times is propped up by a lot of corporate donations and other things who influence what New York Times writes in the first place, such that the direct effect from the public isn't going to hurt them as badly as it would hurt, say, other press outlets who would live and die on their readership.
Yeah. All right. That's all I got for that last bit.
Yeah, I think his definition of power is fine. I think it's true that we've talked about this as well, that everyone who has power wants other people to think they don't. We talked about technique and this idea that as technology gets more advanced, you have all these systems relying on information from other systems to do their work, and so they all get to say, well, I can't do my work because system B is keeping me from doing my work, and system B can say, well, system C is keeping me from doing my work for system A, and so on and so forth. And that's true. And the Iron Triangle is a great example of that. So Moldbug used in the paper, lobbyists are just political groups that are just concerned citizens pulling their money together, communicating things to Congress and helping them get elected if they work with them. Congress just says, hey, we hear the concerns of constituents and write laws based on their concerns, man. If you're concerned, just write me, whatever. And then the civil servants say, man, we can't control the laws that are written. All we can do is dictate public policy the executive would carry out to follow those laws the way they're written. And so everybody kind of has some plausible deniability. Then you add the extra cogs in there like education and the media and so forth, and it gets even more complicated. I think his idea of power and protection from public opinion is really, really interesting. And one thing that I've been on a rampage about recently is this idea that there's such thing as like an apolitical Supreme Court. That there are no apolitical appointees. Everybody has politics. So giving people lifelong, appointments in these situations as if they'll behave apolitically just because they're not elected is just asinine. So good on Moldbug for putting that out back in 2007. And I think the major vertices are all very interesting.
But hold on though. His entire point though is that you can remove politics just by having these appointed people though.
Yeah, one thing that's interesting is if you remove democracy, you'll remove politics. So this will go back to the democracy thing he was talking about. And I agree. Yeah, he dropped the ball on that comment just for that reason, right? You don't need to be democratically elected or have your power maintained to be a political actor. I think his second point, what he makes in this article, is much more lucid than his first one. So.
All right, everybody. This is the TLDR for a portion of 60 plus hours of work. So hopefully people can tune in and get caught up on 2007. And then the other two parts dealing with the Puritan thesis and then what was the other one, Logos?
Neocameralism.
Neocameralism. We'll cover those in the coming weeks. This is Ty Lewis of the Praise of Flight podcast, signing off.